The debate over critical race theory boiled over onto Capitol Hill yesterday as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the nation's first black defense secretary both testified before the House Armed Services Committee. Two Republican congressmen, including Michael Waltz, the first Green Beret ever to serve in Congress, pressed the military leaders about recent efforts to promote inclusion within the ranks, including teaching courses about race at military academies. Here are their responses.
We do not teach critical race theory. We don't embrace critical race theory, and I think that's a spurious conversation. And so we are focused on extremist behaviors.
On the issue of critical race theory, et cetera, I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there. That was started at Harvard Law School years ago, and it proposed that there were laws in the United States, antebellum laws prior to the Civil War, that led to a power differential with African Americans that were three-quarters of a human being when this country was formed. And then we had a Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation to change it. And we brought it up to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took another 100 years to change that. So look, I do want to know. And I respect your service, and you and I are both Green Berets. But I want to know. And it matters to our military and the discipline and cohesion of this military.
Joe, the congressman got a little more than they bargained for in that room when they asked the question about critical race theory. General Milley speaking with conviction there, and that had to be difficult for many of the members sitting in that committee to hear yesterday because so many of them fanned the flames of the insurrection on January 6th, and he was pretty direct in his rebuke there.
He was pretty direct in his rebuke to try to figure out the rage that drove people to assault the Capitol of the United States of America and try to shred the Constitution of the United States. So it's so interesting, Mike Barnicle, when you see a grown-up actually in the middle of this miserable experience where you have children running around of all ages acting out and playing to the lowest common denominator. And it's so interesting, Mike, you know, you and I grew up at a time period where Republicans claim to revere the military. Over the past month, we've seen a United States senator circulate Russian propaganda saying the U.S. military is emasculated. We see a former member of the armed services yesterday attacking the military as woke. Just showing complete and utter ignorance. And General Milley setting him straight.
You know, Joe, there were so many things about General Milley's presentation that were impressive. Among the most impressive in that film clip was, oddly enough, the cutaway to Congressman Gaetz shaking his head at General Milley's testimony. Congressman Gaetz, of course, is under investigation for multiple charges in Florida. But General Milley spoke from the heart. Those were not prepared remarks. He wasn't reading from anything, unlike the questions that members of Congress have before them, written by their staffs, most of them. And General Milley was speaking about an institution that is multicolored, that truly reflects America in terms of its composition. People of many races serve in the United States military. And General Milley was also right about being curious enough and honest enough about wanting to assess where we are in terms of race in this country. What it is that we don't understand. What is critical race theory? I suspect it's not as major an issue as we've made it out to be in the media. But, you know, what is it about America that brings people together? The military is the one institution where people come together, work together, live together, and unfortunately for them, but fortunately for our culture and our country, fight together. And General Milley ought to be applauded not only today, but every single day that he goes to work.
That was an extraordinarily powerful moment from the general there, and certainly required viewing. And let's remember, of course, he is someone who was part of Donald Trump's ill-fated photo op through Lafayette Square, and then later apologized for it, believing the military should not be involved in any sort of political, stunt like that. And there's no other way to call that other than stunt. But Mara Gay, I wanted to get you involved on this as well. Tell me, from your estimation here, why was yesterday so important? We've heard these attacks. Critical race theory has become shorthand now, and it's become like the go-to GOP talking point. And there's been some reporting this week that Trump advisors feel like that could be the key to putting Republicans back in power in the midterms in 2022 and perhaps even the presidency in 2024. They feel like the Democrats have fallen into this rabbit hole of wokeness and won't be able to get out of it. But to have this rebuke yesterday from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, how powerful is that? And what sort of message do you think that sends? Why is that so important to have him rebuke what happened on January 6th and say, look, this is the United States Armed Forces. We're a home for everybody?
Well, first of all, General Milley did something very powerful, which is that he cut through the coded speech and language and rhetoric around critical race theory and started talking about what it actually is to the American people directly. And of course, I think that's very important. Critical race theory, which was started by Derek Bell, Harvard, is the study of racism and how it has been embedded in America's laws and institutions for generations. And so the prime example of that, just to throw one out there, would be redlining, right, in which essentially the government itself took out a map and said, well, because black people live in these neighborhoods, we will not give federal loans to allow Americans to buy mortgages in these neighborhoods. And then everything that followed from that, you can just see generation to generation, the loss of wealth and capital that took place and that occurred. That's just one example. So what critical race theory suggests is that American racism is not simply the product of individual biases, right, but is actually embedded in the structure of American institutions. That is, by the way, not a theory, that is a fact and historical fact. We need to talk about what this is.
So, Rev, what did you think as you watched General Milley yesterday? I don't know if it was surprising, but it was extraordinary that he took that moment on that stage to address that audience on this issue.
I think it was extraordinary because of who he was and how he did it. I really think we cannot underestimate the impact of having a military officer of his stature who clearly has not leaned politically to the left in any way say, I want to know these things and that we need to know these things and the history of how blacks were considered less than human. I don't think you could have had a better witness to an audience that needed to be confronted if they could not be converted. I thought it was one of those moments in history we ought to freeze and play it over and over again.
And even after that hearing, some of those insurrectionist congressmen doubled down on their comments inside that room criticizing General Milley.